Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a prequel of a previous lesson we did from Luke's 17th chapter. We took it from the 20th all the way to the 37th, the tail end of that, and we read of an explanation of he instructs the Pharisees who ask him about the kingdom, and he answers them that the kingdom of Elohim does not come with intent watching, nor shall they say, look here or look here, for look, the kingdom of Elohim is in your midst. So the kingdom is not only future, but it is also present. There is an ever-present dimension. It is to be a perpetual prayer. The future manifold manifestation of it all, the literal kingdom, but we are to be kingdom carriers and carry the seeds where we go with it on earth. Then he gives more extensive treatment on the end times in the private company of the disciples. He compares the generation it's going to hit to the generation of Noah. They're just going about marrying, proceeding in their day-to-day lives, living, persisting in their sin, not expecting anything. Then he also gives the example, verse 32, remember the wife of Lot, so the memory of Genesis is also there. Lot is the wife of the unnamed wife of Lot, who looked back to Sodom as the fire and brimstone was being poured and she was longing for her sin, and she was unable to detach her eyes from it, so she was turned into a pillar of salt. And it will be a moment of decision, and anyone who looks back in the field will not make it. There'll be food for the vultures, essentially. But we actually want to also establish what comes before the range, first 19 verses in the 17th chapter of Luke is going to be the range we're discussing. We just want to briefly cover what occurs in the antecedent chapter, the 16th. In the 17th, we read of the example of a faithful steward, but the 16th opens with an example of an unfaithful steward who is found out by his master that he's been shortchanging him for years, so he calls his debtors to look. He collects the debts and he sells them at discount prices, so he's making as many friends as he can because he is too proud to beg, so he's securing his future as a dishonest one. And then the master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly, because the sons of this age are more shrewd in this generation than the sons of light. So we have before us a model of the worldly and covetous men of the satanic system who are shrewd and wise in the ways of the world. They are more resourceful in using the resources of the world than the children of the light and the children of love are at using the spiritual resources which are at our disposal, and we are literally without excuse for not making the most of it. And he says in the 10th verse, he is trustworthy in what is least is trustworthy also in much, and he who is unrighteous in what is least is unrighteous also in much. In other words, each thing is a test, and if we fail at the lower tier, we cannot be trusted to be trusted with the privilege of being blessed at the higher tier. So the principle is parallel, whether unrighteous or untrustworthy, or the opposite. In whatever situation, the microcosm is going to be a fair indicator of the macrocosm above it. And if you have not been trustworthy with what is another man's, who shall give you what is your own? So this is again the concept of stewardship. None of us are owners. It's a blasphemous claim to claim possession of anything in creation, because all of it is a gift of which we are stewards of the creation. And so everything we have is really the steward of the sovereign one. And no servant is able to serve two masters, for either he shall hate the one and love the other, or else he shall cling to the one and despise the other. You are not able to serve Elohim and wealth. So he's talking to the Pharisees at this point. Remember, they were sneering also at him because they loved silver. They were motivated by money. They were men of mammon. Mammon was not a deity, but the spirit or ethos of materialism, which was in the Aramaic vernacular and they were divided loyalties. They could not fully serve and minister Elohim because they were serving themselves. They were exalting themselves. And he said to them, "You are those who justify before men, but Elohim knows your thoughts, because what is highly thought of among men is an abomination in the sight of Elohim." So they paraded all the trinkets of adulation and acclaim and public justification, but their secret sin was transparent and naked before, and what they thought was worthy and of value among men is of little estimation, and it is in fact declared an abomination. That is the lowest form of contempt in the sight of the Almighty. Then we read of a parable, a certain rich man and a certain beggar by the name Lazarus, who shares the name of the literal brother of Mary and Martha of Magdalene. This is a semi-fictional figure of a parable who he begged for scraps at this rich man's door, and he was denied that, but he makes it they both die around the same time. The beggar makes it to the bosom of Abraham, so he's saved, whereas the man who had prospered in life was buried and died and did not make it there. And what does the rich man cry out? He says, "Father Abraham, have compassion, have mercy on me, and send Eleazar to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering in this flame." So hell is real and hell is hot, and he's going to have such excruciating thirst at the moment when he's about to be disintegrated. But because he did not have the similar compassion that he asked for now in this life, he will be denied his request. But Abraham said, "Son, remember that in your life you received your good, and likewise Lazarus the evil, but now he is comforted and you are suffering." So a lot of things are going to be turned upside down when justice finally triumphs over injustice, when all wrong is righted, when good finally subsumes and conquers evil once and for all. A lot of losers are going to become winners, and a lot of winners are going to become losers. And Lazarus begs at this point for the chance to go back and warn his brothers from the fate he now is in. And Abraham tells him, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. They have all the written resources they need to know that there is consequences for the way you live this life, and hell is real and it is hot." But he said to them, "If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither would they be persuaded, even if one should rise from the dead." So the resurrection is not yet an established fact, but this is where Yahshua is marching on to Jerusalem, and he's passing through the region of Perea in the 17th chapter, the opening verse of which reads, "And he said to his disciples, it is inevitable that stumbling blocks should come, but woe to him through whom they come." So offenses and stumbling blocks are unavoidable. There's nothing we can do about them. We have to make the most by not magnifying them beyond what they are itself. They're stumbling blocks for weak people. Spiritually strong people do not allow another man's peccadillo to become a spiritual stumbling block for themselves, but they have the responsibility to either let it slide or to put it into perspective for the one who is causing a division, an unnatural and unnecessary division because of a certain moral or theological peccadillo that creates a stumbling block, an offense, and a barrier between him and the brothers of the fellowship. "It would be better for him if a millstone is put around his neck and he were thrown in the sea than that he should cause one of these little ones to stumble." So a millstone is an immovable object. When your neck is surrounded by a millstone, it's there for good. It's there to be crushed under its own weight. It is a figure of judgment from which there is no escape. And to be drowned in the sea is going to be a better fate for one who causes one of the children. The children are innocent and they are a blank slate and they have pure potential. So to corrupt the young when they are vulnerable and liable and intellectually impressionable, to do that is to invite judgment on you beyond reckoning of imagining. So in other words, don't be a stumbling block. Don't offend the young. Don't corrupt the young. Stay away from them. Do not harm or injure them in any way. Take heed to yourself. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. So this is a 3-spot forgiveness. A sin is inevitable. It defines our intercourse with the world and even the fellowship and the brothers. We all impact our relationship in some way when we sin against another. And if a brother should sin against us, as they inevitably will, and it doesn't have to be serious, we can rebuke the sin without losing the person, and by forgiving him without even mentioning it. So forgiveness should be our default state of mind. In fact, we shouldn't even be offended by half the things. I've learned from my walk and my progression and maturity is to eliminate the need to be to spread forgiveness. It makes it a lot more manageable when you just don't take offense in the first place. So never try and take anything personal. Not everything's about you. Don't make it all about you. Just be spiritually mature in all things, and forgive all regardless of their worthiness to be forgiven or not. And if he sins against you 7 times a day, and 7 times in a day comes back to you saying, I repent, you shall forgive him. So if 7 times, if this man keeps doing the same thing or some variant or some other sin or some form of sin 7 times over and over again, and he returns and says the same things, you have to receive him unconditionally with open arms, with open heart and open attitude to that his confession is sincere, that he does want to repent, and he has to be given the benefit of the doubt, and the only way that can be happen is through forgiveness, and forgiveness has to be asked for, and we have to make it known when it is not asked for. So the communication is forgiveness to existing as communal creatures. And the apostles said to the master, give us more faith. So they recognized that the exalted and lofty demands for such forgiveness was taxing beyond their present capacity for faith. They knew they needed more faith to live up to these standards that he had just proclaimed before them. Remember, he's addressing them in the opening verse. And the master said, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, be pulled up by the roots and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. So faith is a power of principle and action. Our words have power, and our words have a creative power. We can wish our future into existence if we are faithful and righteous and true, and recognize what is faithful and righteous and true and aligned with the will of the Father's will and purpose and plan for us, to move mountains if necessary. Through the tiniest bit of faith, a mustard seed is all that it takes. A mustard seed is the tiniest of seeds, yet from it springs a plant that is at least 10 feet tall, and it really goes above and beyond itself. But who of you, having a servant plowing or shepherding, would say to him when he has come in from the field, come immediately and sit down to eat? So he's not endorsing the rude treatment of servants and masters, which is a fact of life and a social convention of the ancient world. He's just explaining what is the ordinary or customary thing. Masters do not go out of their way to thank servants for doing what they are paid to do. That is the nature of their arrangement. So it's not, servants have no right to protest their lack of recognition for doing what they are being paid to do. But would he not rather say to them, prepare somewhat for my supper, and gird yourself, and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you shall eat and drink? So by making sure that he eats and drinks, his livelihood is attached to him, and that's how he earns his livelihood, by making sure that he eats and drinks, his every comfort and a need is acquired and prepared for, and that person will eat and drink because by virtue of making the superior one eat and drink. Would he thank that servant because he did what he was commanded? I think not. So this is a rhetorical question whose self-evidently obvious answer is a negative. The master, it would not be a custom for them to have manners enough to be grateful to their servants. That was just the rule and custom of the time. He didn't call for an overthrow of the whole system. He wasn't endorsing this lack of manners between masters and servants, just simply stating a fact of life that was relatable to his immediate audience. So also you, when you have done all that you are commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We have done what was our duty to do. So the mandatory minimal obligation is what we owe as servants. And if we do anything less, that makes us unworthy. So there's nothing we can do to make ourselves worthy, at least because our servant calls us to the loftiest, most exalted demands beyond our capacity to even fulfill, or our function just taxes us, but it does require faith and to lean on him. And we're just going to cover the instance of the healing of the lepers, one of whom was Samaritan, who alone turned to give praise. This is a fitting passage to be read around Thanksgiving times of years. It's really a profound expression of gratitude and action. So a servant should be grateful to his master. A master needn't be grateful to the servant. And we witness certainly an expression of gratitude from the Samaritan, of whom I'll soon read. And it came to be, as he went towards Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. So in the Roman first century Palestine, Judah was to the south. That would have been where Jerusalem was. To the north of that would have been Samaria. To the north of that would have been Galilee. He is progressing. He doesn't make it to Jerusalem until the 19th chapter. So he is still en route, somewhere in between then and there, somewhere in Samaria or Judah. And as he was entering by a certain village, he was met by a leprous man who stood at a distance. So we don't know the name of this village. We know that it was a village, and this was a leprous man who, according to the customary dictates, would have kept himself at distance. He would have been unclean and unfit to enter into physical contact, but he would have made himself known through a distance. And they lifted up their voices, saying, Yahshua, Master, have mercy on us. So they didn't want to touch him, but they wanted to make him known through the power of their voices to have mercy on us. We are lepers. We have the living equivalent of a death, walking with death and living with death. And having seen, he said to them, Go show yourself to the priest. And it came to pass that as they were going, they were cleansed. So the miracle was instantaneous. It was simple. It was a matter of faith being immediately answered. So the custom was to go to the priest for lepers to be declared. They had to be examined and be free from all taint of leprosy in order to be admitted back into the community. And the Samaritans would have went to his priest, and the Judeans would have went to their priest. But so there were barriers between Samaritans and Jews, but leprosy also created, or rather formed, a barrier which united them all into same wretched, miserable, degraded creatures who were worthy of the merciful touch of the healing hand of this Savior, who is the Son and servant of man in Luke's emphasis. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned, praising Elohim with a loud voice. So we read one of them. We don't read which one. We don't read anything about his name or his identity. We do read that he was healed like the rest, but he, unlike them, returned, and he was praising him with a loud voice. So he was giving him the appropriate reverence and respect that was due for having given him a second chance on life and a new lease on life and a new opportunity and just a whole brand new opportunity. Life, and he fell down on his face at his feet, giving thanks to him, and he was a Samaritan. So the Samaritan is the last detail we read of who this man was. It was more important what he did than who he was, but once more, the Messiah illustrates that Samaritans, who were despised universally by the Judeans as outcast enemies and heretics, were capable of surpassing them in good works. We read of this in the famous Good Samaritan parable, Luke 10:25 through 37. The hero of that story is a Samaritan, and the hero of this story is the Samaritan who alone showed the faith. Now he was declared saved. The others were healed, but he was told something they were not. He was declared saved because of his faith. And Yahshua answering said, "Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? So he's asking a reasonable question. He had done the same thing for 9 other people. Where were they? They had gone about their daily lives. They were grateful for the gift, but not the giver. They did not see fit to return to thank him for the new lease on life, for the new opportunity, for the privilege of coexisting and co-inhabiting in human society and being freed from a deadly contaminating disease. But only one of them, strangely enough, was grateful enough to return and give him the acknowledge and praise that he was due. Was no one found to return to give praise to Elohim except this foreigner? So he's just acknowledging the fact that a foreigner had exceeded the chosen people in the righteous response of accepting him for who he was and what he offered. He offered them salvation. He offered them physical healing and spiritual healing. And then he says something that he says uniquely to the Samaritan that he didn't say to anyone else who he healed. And he said, "Rise, go to your way. Your faith has made you well." So his faith had saved him. He was declared saved that day. The other people were declared healed, but we don't read that they were declared saved. So he had exercised saving faith in having the gratitude and the reverence of submission, of recognizing the one for who he was and what he did to him. And it was a debt he could never repay. The least he could do was show up and return and worship and surrender and thank the man for giving him the new lease on life, the born-again experience that he alone can uniquely provide. And we should all, in some sense, try to identify with the lepers because we, whether we like it or not, we were all once dead in trespasses and sin, yet here we are now. And we have one of the ways we can repay the debt we can never repay. To pay it forward is to tell the tale. So that's the reason I'm here. I hope that's the reason you're here, to learn from my story, to add to your story. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. See you next time. Bye-bye.